Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say ahoy or land ho and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So I'm joining the podcast today from the lovely traffic of Interstate 95 in Massachusetts.
And what vehicle are you in?
I'm in the Kia Rio, which is
excellent.
actually, you know what? I mean, we might as well just start with it. This is a pretty nice car. It's a great car for $20,000. It drives really well. It's pretty well behaved. It feels solid. The suspension tuning is decent. I was actually going to check and see if it has a beam axle in the rear, because it really reminds me a lot of that first generation Volkswagen Golf. You know, just sort of it's a simple, solid, small car.
Well, let's see. Why don't you keep talking for a second while I look up the specs, and I'll tell you if it has a beam axle.
Okay, let's see.
Actually, let's see.
I'm quite impressed with its.
Oh wait, here we go.
Engine. It's like the 1.6 liter.
It does in fact have a beam axle.
See, look at that. That's perfect. It's got a 1.6 liter engine that's actually way more lively too than you'd expect. It performs quite well. For the first day or two, I was wondering whether or not it's a turbo. It seemed that sort of lively to me. But yeah, have you driven the Rio?
I have not driven the new Rio yet. I think I actually just got one scheduled coming up middle of September. Yeah, so coming up middle of September, I've got one scheduled. So that'll actually be my first opportunity to drive the new one. And yeah, that 1.6, it's not a turbo, but it's got 130 horsepower. And it's obviously not a very heavy car. Let's see, how much does it weigh? It only weighs 2,600 pounds, 2,650 pounds.
Yeah.
Do you have the automatic or the manual?
I have the automatic, and so the thing I love about it is that it's
an extra 50 pounds.
Yeah, but that's impressive actually that their auto is that light. But it's got low limits. We always talk about that, right? The sort of slow car fast kind of thing. So you can have a hilarious amount of fun with it. Like today, getting on 95, the on-ramp there's nobody on it because it's the middle of the day. We had a half day on Friday today. And so I took it at like 40 miles an hour. And you just you get it at the limits of what its adhesion will do. And you just give it a little bump of opposite lock. You can't do that in a car with higher limits safely. Nothing bad is going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can't push the tire. On most modern cars, you can't really approach the limits of the tires and the suspension at any kind of a reasonable speed. So you can't really work on your own skills as a driver. But this thing's got relatively skinny, P185 tires on 15-inch wheels. So you can have some fun with something like that, especially when it only weighs 2,700 pounds. Yeah,
it feels great being mildly irresponsible with it. And, that's the other thing, that it feels good doing it, where, other cars, I think, I'm trying to think, the Mitsubishi Mirage is a good example, where that car has delightfully low limits, but it also doesn't really want to play along. The Rio, they have done quite a bit of learning over at Kia to figure out how to tune suspensions and how to make the cars handle. The steering's not all that communicative, but it's not as numb as it had been on earlier Kia models. So it's pretty good. You get into a corner, you can tell what's going on. The chassis is set up where there's some compliance, which is good because Kias in the past had also been pretty stiff. This one, the stiffness is in the structure where you want it, and not the suspension where you don't. So it really, again, it's one of those things where I was talking with a coworker about it, and his takeaway was just, man, Kia makes good cars. And I said, yeah, I can't disagree. For 20 grand, it looks great on the outside. It's comfortable up front. The back seat is a little tight because it's a smallish car. And the cargo area is it's good for what it is. It's a small hatch. And, the materials are good. The assembly quality is good. It does everything you expect of it. It doesn't give you any surprises. So that's all high praise for a car that starts, I think, the sedan starts under $14,000. So to me, it feels like a really good deal. It may not drive with quite the sort of gravitas that a Volkswagen would. The Rabbit, or not the Rabbit anymore, but the Golf always impresses me with sort of how solid it feels on the road. This feels really buttoned down here in the Rio, but it's maybe not quite as sort of weighty feeling as the German stuff.
Of course, you can't get any of those German cars for $14,000 brand new.
Right, and I'm trying to think, this is more of like a Polo class, right, than a Golf.
Yeah.
So they don't offer
and VW's never offered the Polo here.
Yeah. So I don't know for what it is, and this is the launch edition too, because they did just redo the Rio. So it has launch edition package on it with spiffy leather accented seats and the sort of red accents on the dash and the doors. You look around and it is definitely built to a price. The door panels are hard plastic, and it doesn't have nav, but it has Android Auto and the UVO infotainment, and there's not a ton of features that you need on a car in this class. It's got air conditioning, power windows, power mirrors, and they're like, what else could a boy want?
Just the basics.
Yeah, and I love, actually, I tweeted the other day, the HVAC setup. It's 3 knobs and a couple of buttons. That's it.
Exactly as it should be.
The best. I continue to be very impressed with Kia's sort of small car offerings, and this is just sort of another in the long run of hey, they continue to get better, and they're really good. And it's 38.2 miles per gallon on the average right now. So that's not.
Yeah, I mean,
terrible.
it's just a shame that American consumers in particular, but even globally, more and more, don't seem to care about cars at all, small or otherwise. And so, unfortunately, as good as these cars are getting, if you want a new car, that's affordable, especially for a first time buyer, something like this, is what you need. And yet there are, getting to be fewer and fewer of these because customers just aren't buying them.
Yeah, that really is too bad. I think about what this would be like as a compact crossover. And it would be good, but you'd lose some of that fuel efficiency. You'd actually lose some of that fun to drive spirit that's just there. Small, light cars just have a thing about them. And when you try to, as a compact crossover, it wouldn't be that different, but I think it would be different enough where it would just feel a little bit more dull. It would be a little further off the ground. The suspension would be a little bit softer, a little bit more travel, so more compliance. And it would probably be okay, but it wouldn't be the same. And, we just like things to stay the same.
Yeah. And, it's probably only a matter of time before a crossover based on this platform for the Kia brand shows up. Hyundai, recently launched the Kona, which is in this same B segment size class. And it's doing pretty well so far. And I would imagine that, by this time next year at the very latest, if not, probably much earlier in 2019, we will probably see a small Kia crossover, along exactly those lines, with this 1.6 liter engine, probably a version, with a 1.4 liter turbo, much like the Kona, and something, it'll probably be a good vehicle, just as the Kona is, but it will have lost something in that translation.
Yeah, and you know what? That's fine if that's what people are buying. Fine, that's whatever. I don't want to sound like one of those sort of stick in the mud sort of
well, the other thing too is, the other thing is, you're probably not going to get that loaded Kia small crossover for the same $18,400 sticker price as a loaded Rio EX.
Yeah, and that's what,
it's probably going to cost you at least $3,000 or $4,000 more than that, if and maybe even up into the $25,000-$26,000 range, to get it with the same level of equipment or more that's on a loaded Rio.
Well, and as an automaker, that's a great move because you fatten up your margins, because it doesn't really cost any more to build a crossover than it does to build the Rio. And this one, they actually charge you more for the hatchback, which I'm offended by. But so this is an EX, and I don't think it's totally loaded, but the EX is like $18,700 for the EX hatch, for the Rio hatch, and then it's got the launch edition with the leather seat trim, and they put in floor mats, so that's like $630 extra. So the total sticker with freight and everything was just over $20,000. Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad deal for a car, and I can see how they'd say, okay, but if we make it a little bit more expensive as a crossover, it's $21,000, and that's all profit. Fine. I will say though, I drove the Kona, and that's an excellent car too. I don't care what it is, it just drives really well. So, okay, if that's the future, I'm not that scared of it.
They did do a good job on the Kona.
The Kona's, it's not on the same platform though, right? It's a different.
No, I think it is a different platform, but I mean it's similar in size.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Hyundai and Kia together, they are. I don't know where they stand in terms of sales, but they're still a company that's on the move, and they really seem to have their eye on the ball. They make good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what have you been driving? I mean, you're not driving currently like I am, but you're driving.
No, I'm sitting in front of my computer and my microphone right now.
Desk jockey.
But I have driven. I did spend some time last week driving the updated 2019 Jeep Cherokee. So the Cherokee is kind of the middle of the Jeep lineup. Above the Renegade and the Compass, and below the Grand Cherokee and the Wrangler. And when the current generation Cherokee arrived a few years ago, it was a bit controversial with its design. It was probably the least Jeep-looking vehicle in a long time, actually. It had those narrow slit lights at the top of the front corners, and then the headlights embedded down below, and it was a little unusual looking.
So did you?
You still had the.
Yeah. Did you love it or did you hate it when you first saw it?
I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. Yeah. I was conflicted about it. It took me a while. Once I got used to it, I was fine with it. Yeah. I never really fell in love with the look, but I wasn't one of those people that really hated it either. So it was fine.
That's what we can hope for. It's fine.
Well, I mean, if you talk to designers, that's the last thing they want to hear from customers.
Right.
Or potential customers. They don't want to hear it's fine. They want people to either, they prefer them to love it, But, generally when you have something that customers really love, you will also find a significant proportion of the population that also hates it, because when it's more extreme like that, a great case in point for Chrysler, was back in the mid 90s when they launched, what was the DR generation, the pickup trucks, the 1994 Ram pickup trucks.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first one that had that dropped fender, big rig look. And, prior to that, the Dodge pickup trucks were always, they were pretty bland looking. There was really nothing much to them that set them apart from anybody else's pickup trucks. And when they launched that one, when they did the focus groups with it before it launched, they found that, about half the people they showed it to thought it was fantastic, and the other half hated it. And they looked at how many trucks are we selling right now, and at that point they were selling about 80,000 a year of the previous generation Dodge pickups, compared to about 300,000 to 400,000 a year for Ford and for GM for their trucks. And they figured, well, if half of the truck buying population loves this thing, we're only selling 80,000 a year now. We've got nothing to lose. We might as well go for it.
Yeah.
And they did, and it was a huge success for them, and it has continued to be a success to this day. With the Cherokee, the Cherokee, when it came, the current generation Cherokee arrived, it was replacing the Liberty, which did fine in sales, but it was not a hugely loved member of the Jeep lineup, so they went, kind of in a completely different direction. The old Cherokee, the Liberty, was based on it was a unibody, but it was a rear drive platform. This time they went to, a front wheel drive, transverse engine front wheel drive platform based on a Fiat platform. And, they went with a more daring design, and it sold well at first. Sales, kind of dropped off after a couple of years, but it did well enough. But when they decided to do a mid-cycle refresh this year, they made the front end look more conventional, more in line with the rest of the Jeep lineup. So it's got, it still has the same basic grille design, but the headlights are more like what you would find on a Compass or on a Grand Cherokee, with single cluster, on each of the front corners. And it's just more conventional looking.
Yeah.
And it looks fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, not exciting. Certainly less controversial than before. And I think most people will like it just fine. It's doing fine in terms of sales.
Well, it makes me wonder if the when they brought back the Cherokee, it was significant. The Cherokee name was coming back, and it was a big style departure. I wonder if that was a trial balloon for seeing how it was received with the public. Another one of those like, hey, we don't really have anything to lose. Let's see how they like this, because there's only so much of that retro-ish Jeep styling that can happen. They at a certain point you need to evolve the look, and I thought back then, like, well, is that what they're doing? Are they using the Cherokee to determine the look of the next Grand Cherokee? Because Jeep kind of has sort of like two different style paradigms, right? They've got the Wrangler kind of thing, that you've got the Wrangler and the Renegade that look very similar. With the round lights and that kind of thing. And then they've got the more classical sort of like the full-size Jeep, the Wagoneer, the
more
Grand
mainstream
Cherokee.
looking.
Right. So I was like, well, is that going to sort of set the stage, set the tone for what the next Grand Cherokee is going to be? And we still don't know, because they haven't updated fully updated the Grand Cherokee since then. But it was a bold move, and this one is like they're pulling back a little bit. This sort of mid-cycle refresh, it doesn't look bad at all. It's just not anywhere near as bold.
No, I mean it's a good looking vehicle, and it looks fairly contemporary. It doesn't look retro or anything like that. So I think it's going to work, and I think it's going to do well in the marketplace. Yeah. And in addition to the design, they also updated the mechanicals. So you still have the much unloved Tiger Shark 2.4 liter.
It's not bad. It's not bad with the Tiger Shark. It does okay.
It's got it. Yeah, I mean, when they refreshed it a few years back and added the multi-air cylinder head, the valve control, things like that, it got a lot better. It's a lot more refined than it used to be, but it's still not top of the class as far as 4 cylinders go. But it's fine. And then, they also offer a 3.2 liter version of the Pentastar,
right? Which is
with the top engine,
just as thirsty as the 3.6 liter.
Yeah, I know. It's like, why bother? Why not just go give people the extra power of the 3.6?
And I didn't mean to cut you off. So they've got that. Is that what you have? Is the new turbo?
Yeah, so what I had is the new 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder, which, variations, this is FCA's new global 4-cylinder engine design that they're using in both transverse and longitudinal applications. So this is the same engine, basically the same engine that you'll find in, for example, Alfa Romeos as the base engine in the Giulia and Stelvio. It's in the new Wrangler, and now it's also in the Cherokee, and we'll be seeing it in other FCA vehicles in the next couple of years as well. Unlike the version in the Wrangler, which we'll talk about next week, which has the e-torque mild hybrid system on there, the 48-volt mild hybrid system, the version that's in the Cherokee, the transverse mounted version, does not get the mild hybrid system. But I think that this is not the last update we'll be seeing to this Cherokee in the next year or so. I wouldn't be at all surprised if sometime probably next year, we also see a full hybrid version of the Cherokee, in line with some of the stuff we heard from the 5-year plan announcement in June. Because the 2-liter turbo, actually all 3 engines in the Cherokee are mated with the ZF 9-speed transmission, which is a good transmission, and the
It's okay.
It's a lot better than it used to be.
Is it? I haven't driven one in a while. When it was weird when it started out.
Yeah, I mean, they had issues, and when we get to listener mail, we'll talk a little more about that. But it had issues with the controls early on. But over the last couple of years, it's gotten a lot better. They made some software updates, changed the calibrations, and it's a pretty smooth shifting transmission. Doesn't do anything weird anymore. At least it didn't do anything weird while I was driving it. But the hybrid drive unit that's in the Chrysler Pacifica hybrid was designed to fit within the exact same package envelope as the 9-speed. So basically anywhere where you have the 9-speed, FCA could drop in that hybrid drive unit in place of it and just install a battery somewhere in the vehicle and turn it into a hybrid vehicle.
Oh, that's really smart.
So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see a strong hybrid version of the Cherokee. Probably not a plug-in hybrid, because I don't know that they necessarily have enough room to package a bigger battery for a plug-in, but certainly a regular hybrid version, with the battery being under the rear cargo floor where the spare tire goes now. And that would give you significantly better fuel economy out of this thing, and it'll be directly competitive with the likes of the RAV4 hybrid, the upcoming next generation Escape, which is going to have a hybrid in there, and it's probably not going to be too long before we see the Honda CR-V hybrid here in the U.S. It's already available in Europe. So, that'll probably be sometime within sometime within the next 12 months. We may see it, debut either in LA or maybe the Detroit Auto Show in January. But for now, the one I drove has the 2-liter turbo, which in this application has 270 horsepower, 295 foot-pounds of torque. It's a lovely engine. It's got it was a little noisier than I expected in this vehicle. Not an unpleasant noise, but it had a little more of a mechanical snarl to it than I was expecting. But it did fine. It's got plenty of power for this vehicle. And the one I drove, the version I drove was the limited trim. Which is the more luxury oriented, so it had lots of amenities in there, leather seats and everything, heated and cooled seats and all that good stuff. And it's all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. All Jeeps are four-wheel drive of various flavors. This is, if you plan to go off-roading, the Limited is not the one you want to get. You'll want the Trailhawk.
Well, yeah, the Trailhawk has the different fascias for a better approach and departure angle, and it's got more ride height. Yeah,
right. Yeah, and it's got skid plates, and it it's actually you can lock the center differential and things like that. That's the one that's trail rated, and I've driven the Cherokee Trailhawk, off road on a pretty challenging off road course at the Chrysler Proving Grounds in Chelsea, and there are places where a Wrangler could go where a Trailhawk probably wouldn't be able to keep up, but not many.
Yeah.
Any of the Trailhawk edition Jeeps can go pretty much anywhere that anybody but the most hardcore off-roaders are going to want to go. So you've got low range, like four-wheel drive low range in all those. You don't get that in the Limited or the altitude or latitude trim levels. But for 98% of the people that are going to buy a Cherokee, maybe 99%, they're never going to even consider doing that anyway.
It's a mall crawler. It's made to be able to go through the snow.
Even if you've got, if you're going to, a cabin, in northern Michigan or, going on the beach somewhere, the four-wheel drive system that's in even the Limited, is going to handle almost any situation, that you're going to get into, as long as you're not fording through 18 inches of water, which the Trailhawk has no problem with. The Limited and the other trim levels, might run into some issues there. But of course, the Trailhawk also has off-road tires, which are going to give you all that extra traction as well.
Yeah.
Things with the Limited, you have more, you have all-season tires that are really more designed for street use. But aside from that, it's roomy, it's comfortable. The ride quality is really good. It gets decent, not exceptional fuel economy. I got about 23 miles per gallon with it, which is okay. I think, if and when they do a hybrid version, it'll probably do a lot better than that. It'll probably get up into the mid 30s, but, and it's, I think, the 23 is probably a little bit lower than what you might get with some of its competitors like a CRV or a RAV4. But not a whole lot.
But
lower.
Also, like, neither of those have a turbo. So like that's the thing.
That's
like,
true.
The turbo engine is probably really
yeah, you got a lot more performance with this one.
Yeah, and so I'm interested to hear about that engine because an all-new four-cylinder is important for FCA, but also what's the point of offering that next to the 6? It has more torque than the 6, and that's the problem with the 6 is that it doesn't have as much torque down low. It's a rever versus the 4.
Yeah, and I think at some point we will probably see the V6 drop out of the Cherokee lineup, because it really doesn't. It's not needed there anymore with this 4-cylinder, and it may stick around till the end of the current model cycle. But yeah, I mean, given the power and torque you've got, the 4-cylinder turbo's got 295 foot-pounds of torque. The V6 is only 239. Right. It comes at 4,400 RPM.
Right, where the turbo is like 1,800.
Yeah, so it's almost right off idle. You've got tons of torque. Way more torque from that turbo than you're going to get out of the V6. So I think there are probably some customers who prefer to have a V6 over a turbo, but I would take the 2-liter turbo over this any day.
Yeah, how does that change the character of the Cherokee? One of the things that I noticed about the Cherokee with the V6 was the fact that it's fine, but it's a little soft off the line because just the nature of that engine and its power delivery. Where one of the things I liked about it with the Tiger Shark is that it's got a little bit more oomph right off the line. So it probably feels... The
turbo's definitely got the oomph.
Yeah, so it feels really confident.
You're going to... Yeah, you're going to, I mean, the Cherokee is not the most lightweight in the class, in part because of, part because of the 4-wheel drive hardware that you get in there. It's a more sophisticated 4-wheel drive system, that's capable. It's a lot more capable than the typical all-wheel drive that you find on most of its competition. The all-wheel drive systems you get on most of these vehicles, you have a lighter weight rear axle that is only getting typically no more than 15 to 20% of the torque sent back there just when the front wheels start to slip. It doesn't have the kind of capability that this thing does, so it's going to be a little bit heavier, but conversely, you've got capabilities. You can go places with this that you can't with the others. Or at least you can give people the impression that you might consider going places that you can't go with the others. It's capable of doing it. Most customers will never actually do it. But it's definitely got more aggressive acceleration than the V6 or the 2.4 liter version.
Huh. But so overall, the refresh has been successful. I know they changed the nose. There's a new hood, and the interior gets like some just detail updates, right? It's not as huge.
Yeah, nothing really substantial inside. There's some trim pieces that are different, but the basic look remains the same. And there was nothing wrong with the basic look of it. It was always a good looking vehicle. It had a nice interior anyway, nice materials, and the fit and finish was really good. So I don't think anybody had any real complaints about the cabin of this thing. And it's reasonably roomy for 4 adults, 5 in a pinch. It's not the widest vehicle in the world, but it's fine. So I think, most people that are going to be customers for a compact crossover that want at least the potential to go other places, or want something that's going to have more capability when you get into really bad winter weather, as an example, or if you live in the mountains, where you might have to climb some hills. Something like the Cherokee is going to be more capable than what you're going to get from most of the competitors. Yeah,
well, and you sort of laid out the way you can talk yourself into the Jeep too, right? Whether or not you actually use that capability, they do. It is there. It's baked in, and so that is sort of the selling point. And I think the engine is going to be a differentiator. That turbo engine will be a differentiator, at least for now, among its competitors. And they really do know their market. I think the Cherokee was the right vehicle for the customers that they really need to grow the Jeep brand. And I think it resonated with them. I see them all over the place here in New England.
Yeah, my next door neighbor's got one, and they love it. They think it's great. They have the 2018 model, and this one, the one I had is equipped with, all the driver assist stuff, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, lane keeping, and all that stuff, and it all works great, for urban driving, which is what these things are going to be primarily used for. It works really well. So I think most people that buy it are going to be perfectly happy with it, especially if they get the 2-liter turbo. It's not cheap, which is, Jeep has really Jeep and Ram are the two cash cows that are, driving Fiat Chrysler automobiles forward these days. That's where all the money comes from. You get some, they get some cachet at the high end from Maserati and Alfa Romeo. But the Jeep and Ram brands are what pay the bills. And, this particular one that I drove, stickered at $39,200. Yeah, and you can get it up, well over $40,000 if you add a few more options.
Well, what does it have for options? $40,000 buys you a Grand Cherokee Limited. Like that. That's just sort of, at least it did. I'm sure prices have ratcheted up a little bit since I actually bought one, but mine stickered for $40,000 and it had no options. It was just like, it was the standard Limited.
So the Cherokee Limited 4x4 starts at $33,600, and the options on this one were the technology group that gets you the driver assist stuff for $1,000, the luxury group that gets you second row adjusting seats that slide forward and back a bit. Plus carpeted cargo area, foot-activated hands-free tailgate, the tonneau, for the cargo area, and ventilated front seats for $1,200. The turbo is a $500 option over the V6.
Oh, that's right, the engine. Yeah, that's it though. That's not actually that much. $500 for that engine.
And and then the 9-speaker stereo with subwoofer, $700, and the Uconnect 4 with nav is $800, and then $1,445 for the destination charge, which seems kind of high. But
with the Limited doesn't come standard with nav?
No.
Huh. That's a little different.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're playing. Look, they're getting their profit.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and as long as customers are willing to pay for it, but it's just it's part of the trend away from affordability in new cars. Which kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with the Rio. There's not that many cars that you can buy new anymore for under $20,000.
Right.
And unfortunately, most customers, aren't going for those cars anyway, which is why there's fewer and fewer of them available.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is kind of people want the stuff, and I understand that, and so leasing has driven that ability to drive more car than you can afford.
Leasing and longer loan terms as well.
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to say. They'll give you like a 9-year loan now if you want it. Not quite. But
not in the U.S., but getting there. You can get 72 and 84-month loans now,
which is
in the U.S.
That's a long loan.
That's nearly a mortgage.
Yeah, I mean, the cars can do it generally. They'll make it out of the loan without having a catastrophic failure. But you're gonna wind up.
Well, without a catastrophic, mechanical failure. But if you get into an accident, for example.
Oh yeah, you're gonna be.
Depending on your insurance, your insurance may only pay off, whatever the market value is at that time, which may be many thousands of dollars less than what you owe on that loan. So it's definitely not recommended that you go for those kinds of long-term loans if you can avoid it.
Well, the other so there's a lot of ways that financially you can get screwed on an automobile, and so that whole loan thing is they'll sell you another gap insurance instrument, right? That says we'll pay it off even if you're upside down. If you total it, if it gets totaled, we'll pay off that difference or whatever. The other thing that I took advantage of was I refinanced my car loan, and I did it just to get a lower monthly payment. But they look at the quote unquote equity you have in your car, where they're comparing current resale value versus what you owe, and they'll say, do you want to borrow against your car? I was like, no. I don't want to borrow against my car.
I mean, it's one thing to borrow against your house because, most of the time, aside from, the period 10 years ago, or if you live in California, chances are, your house value is not going to, drop too dramatically. But, with a car, unless you own, something very, very expensive and rare, the value of that asset is always going to go down.
It only goes down. Yeah. It's like, and then if something happens,
to borrow against that so-called equity there, that's equity that is going to evaporate eventually.
Oh yeah. I was just shaking my head. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
That's just insane to even consider that.
Yeah,
if you need cash, there are much better ways of getting it than borrowing and taking an equity loan on your car.
Right, and I also don't recommend taking an equity loan on your house to buy a car. Although some people will do that, or they'll get a mortgage, and the reason why is because you can write down mortgage interest, and you can't write down car loan interest. I get it, but that's still not a good idea.
For now, at least.
And for now, that may change. Believe me, that's they want to change that. So anyway, I think we've talked about the cars we're driving enough. I don't have the topics in front of me, but you do.
All right. So I did also drive another vehicle this week from FCA, which is the 2019 Ram 1500 with e-torque.
Oh, okay, the hybrids. Yeah. So those are. I forgot about that. You were sending us horse pictures.
Yeah.
So that's both the Hemi and the V6 with the hybrid, right? You got to try both?
Right. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to get into the V6 because they only had 3 of them there, and by the time I got to them, they were already gone. So I didn't get a chance to spend any time with that one, but I did spend quite a bit of time with the Hemi version. And so, just as a refresher, earlier, like back in March, we drove the regular Hemi Ram, and it was quite like that vehicle. And this one is basically the same truck, but now what they've done is they've added a 48 volt mild hybrid system to it, which this is something they announced at the Detroit Auto Show in January, and they call it e-torque. So what this is, it's similar in principle to what we had from GM, for various times over the last 10 years with their mild hybrid system, their belted alternator starter system. They've called it e-assist and various other things over time. Chrysler's calling, or Fiat Chrysler's calling it e-torque. So it uses a belted starter generator that it's a 48 volt generator that replaces the alternator, the regular alternator, and then it also has a 48 volt lithium-ion battery, and the battery is mounted against the back wall of the cab behind the rear seat. It's not too big in size. It's about the size of basically like 2 15-inch laptops stacked up on top of each other. And it's got 12 lithium-ion cells in there. The truck, the Ram uses pouch cells from LG Chem. The Jeep Wrangler, because of the fact that you can take the top off of the thing, and so the battery pack might potentially get exposed to the elements, they have a sealed battery pack with liquid-cooled cells. The Ram has an air-cooled battery pack. And the Jeep uses cells, prismatic cells from Samsung. But basically, what this does, having the 48 volt system on there allows it to do some regenerative braking, so it can recapture energy when you step on the brake pedal or when you're just coasting. It can provide some electrical assist. When you've got power in the battery, it can use the starter generator to provide some assist. So it's got the cylinder deactivation system. So normally when you've got cylinder deactivation, if you start going up a mild grade and it's in 4-cylinder mode, it'll kick on the other 4 cylinders, put them back on to give you enough power to keep climbing the hill at constant speed. With the e-torque system, it can use the starter generator to transfer some torque back into the engine and allow it to keep the cylinders off longer, also do more aggressive fuel shutoff during deceleration, and it also for the start-stop system, it can also be more aggressive with the start-stop because you've got this bigger battery that you can store energy in to power all the systems in the car or in the truck. With most regular 12 volt stop start systems, a lot of times, especially when the temperatures are warm, when you come to a traffic light or something, the engine will shut off, and then 15 seconds later it'll start back up again because it doesn't have enough power to power your air conditioning and your lights and all the other stuff. With the extra juice that's stored in the 48 volt battery, it can keep that stuff on without having to run the engine. And depending on the conditions, you can potentially have the engine shut off for up to 10 minutes at a time. So that's
which
is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's huge for a truck too, because again, you've talked about the idea of those gains when the efficiency is low, like it is in a truck, just by its very nature. Like it's easy to realize much larger gains percentage-wise in efficiency than it is in smaller, already efficient cars. So, like that's a perfect arena for it. How drastic are the changes that they've made to the truck? Like, do they have like a heat pump HVAC system and that kind of stuff?
No, they don't have any of that yet. So they've kept it fairly straightforward. So they didn't change any of that. Still got a conventional air conditioning system. Still has most of the other systems there's relatively few parts that actually change in the truck. the air conditioning system and everything else is the same. The inverter for the starter generator, because the starter generator is a DC electric machine, it's an AC electric machine, and so they've got power electronics that convert it back and forth between AC and DC because the battery stores direct current. Right. The generator does alternating current because it's more efficient, and so that power electronics unit is mounted right on the starter generator, and then the battery management system is integrated right into the battery pack. So there's relatively few parts that are changed. The belt that drives it on the non e-torque version, the accessory belt that drives the alternator and water pump and things like that is a 6-rib belt. On the e-torque version, they went to a slightly wider 8-rib belt, so it has more power transfer capability, and it has the same lifespan, expected service life as the 6-rib belt. So it should be good for 10 years, 150,000 miles without requiring any service. And also, one other difference on the V6 version, something I didn't realize before, was on the V6 in the Ram, the Pentastar V6 in the Ram, the alternator, even on the normal versions, the alternator is actually hung off the front of the engine. It doesn't sit up on top or off on the side like it does on most engines. It's off the front, and it's actually a reverse drive. So when you look at it, if you open the hood on one of these things and look down on it, you'll see that the pulley is actually on the back side of the alternator. So it's facing what would normally be the front of the alternator is facing the front of the engine block. And so for the e-torque version, they did the same thing. So because of that, because you don't get the same normal airflow that you would get when it's mounted the other way around for cooling it, the starter generator on the V6 on the Pentastar is liquid cooled and has its own dedicated cooling circuit and heat exchanger. And
it also doesn't it use a larger capacity generator? So I think we did talk about that a little bit. Was they actually use a larger generator or something on the V6, or maybe I'm just imagining that, but I do remember that the V6 is liquid cooled.
The generator on the V6 is capable of adding up to 90 foot-pounds of torque to the engine, and on the V8 it's 130 foot-pounds. Oh. So you get more capacity out of the one on the V8 than you do out of the V6. In both cases, neither one is capable of, driving the truck electrically. So, unlike, in a Prius or a lot of other hybrids where, when you've got enough power in the battery, the engine can shut off and just drive the car electrically for a mile and a half or so. You don't get any of that with this one, but it does, it does assist the engine and reduces the load on the engine. So it's consuming less fuel. And one of the other interesting details that they talked about, Brian Spahn, who's the chief engineer on the electrification stuff on these engines, was telling us about this interesting detail that they did when the transmission is shifting. When you upshift and the engine speed needs to come down, it's actually using the starter generator to actually help slow down the engine to get it to the lower speed that it would be for the next gear. And in that process of slowing down the engine, and it's only, maybe 100, 150 milliseconds of time, but in that, it's actually doing some regenerative braking and capturing energy because it's taking energy out of the engine to slow it down for the next gear, and it's capturing that energy and feeding it back to the battery. So every opportunity they get to capture some energy, they're using it. And then similarly on the flip side, when you're downshifting and you need to rev up the engine to match the gears, they're actually, instead of using more fuel to do that, they're using the motor to drawing power from the battery, using the motor to spin the engine up, a few hundred RPM to get it to match the next gear. So you both get smoother gear shifts and faster gear shifts, and it also saves fuel.
Well, maybe that'll make them more responsive, because that's one of my biggest complaints is that in cars these days, you'll put your foot down for a downshift or something and it thinks about it. And you're trying to get into like a hole in traffic or something, and it's just like, what the hell? I want the power now.
Yeah,
and it's an emissions thing.
It certainly felt responsive in these trucks that we drove. I had no complaints about the way the transmission felt or shifted. So I think it will make a difference in drivability, and overall the drivability on this thing was great. The start stop, that's something that a lot of people complain about in their cars is the start stop, and because you've got all this extra power from the 48 volt system compared to a 12 volt system, what it actually does when you do the start stop. Normally on most cars, when you take your foot off the brake pedal, it starts to, it immediately fires up the engine. But in those cases where when you're sitting at a light and it needs to restart the engine before the light turns green, when your foot is still on the brake and it restarts, those are the times when you actually tend to feel it the most, because you've got that reaction force against the engine, from the brakes. You're holding the brakes down, and that's when you feel the engine shudder the most on the restart. Because it's able to keep the engine off more of the time, you almost never feel that. You will rarely, if ever, experience that shudder of the engine restarting while you've got the brakes applied. And then even when it does restart, it actually the electric the starter generator actually gets the motion going a little bit as it's restarting the engine, and so you get about half a wheel rotation under electric propulsion as the engine fires up. And what that the result is basically you will almost never feel the engine actually starting up. It's much smoother than it is on most other vehicles.
Yeah, and that can be one of the biggest sort of turnoffs for start-stop is that sort of the thumpiness of it, especially because it happens more often in the situations where you actually want it, and then it becomes just an annoyance. Most of the time, I don't mind it. I've grown used to it, but I think that it's something that people consistently comment about. They'll ask, does this car shut itself off? And it's like, yeah, it does. Oh, that's annoying. It's like, yeah, you get used to it. You save fuel. But the smoother ones are definitely, you notice when you have a car that will do it more smoothly. And I feel like this is kind of the way of the future. Like, we're just going to see more of these like hybrids with it seems like they've done as much as they can at this point. There's still things that can happen the next time the Ram is redesigned again. They can make deeper changes, but you've got an engine that deactivates cylinders. You've got the belted alternator and starter, and you've got a battery on it. Like that right there must put the fuel economy the combined economy solidly in the 20s. Or even higher. Not quite on the Hemi. So the standard Hemi is rated at 17 miles per gallon combined. The e-torque version is rated at 19, which is 12% improvement. Yeah, that's pretty good. And during our drive in it, I averaged about 19.2, which is pretty impressive, for a Hemi V8. This is on a four-wheel drive crew cab. Laramie Longhorn, which is the biggest and heaviest version of this thing, and prettiest.
So So getting a 12% improvement in fuel economy, especially when you're going from 17 to 19, it makes a much bigger difference than if you're going from 35 to 37.
Right.
And they're still waiting on EPA for the final certification on the V6 e-torque. That one, so the Hemi e-torque is available at dealers now, and the V6 e-torque, which is going to be the base engine in the new Rams, should be hitting dealerships in the next month or so. And that one, the 2018 Ram with the Pentastar is rated at 20 miles per gallon combined. They're expecting probably 2 to 3 miles per gallon improvement in the combined rating with the e-torque version on the new truck. So that'll put it, in the 22, 23 mile per gallon range, which is pretty acceptable, for a truck this size.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty good. And so when you consider what's going on with trucks elsewhere, FCA has they're not the first. There have been some before, but really they've got the only hybrid trucks available right now. They're going to maintain that for a little while until somebody else gets in the game. And they don't have a compact truck, where other, GM and Ford both have the new, they've got the Colorado, and Ford's bringing out the Ranger, and, Toyota has the Tacoma. So FCA still has something unique. They've got their own kind of niche, and it's not a bad place for them to be. And I think the new Ram is really good, just overall.
Oh, yeah.
I don't care what powers it. It's just a good truck. So
yeah, it's a good looking truck. It drives really well. I think it still has the best driving dynamics of any of the big trucks.
I'll
by
agree.
far.
I'll agree with that.
And the interior is a really nice place to be as well.
Especially in the Laramie Longhorn fancy belt buckle edition, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one we were driving, stickered at 67,000, which is by no means cheap. But then again, it's also not the most expensive, full size truck you can get by any stretch of the imagination. You can certainly spend a lot more than that. I think a Ford Super Duty Limited or Platinum, I think it's the Limited is the top one now, can get you up, closing in on $100,000, which is that's insane for a pickup truck.
Yeah,
But yeah, there will be more hybrid trucks, and FCA's also still got the diesel coming back next year in the Ram, and the current Ram diesel is. It's rated at 27 miles per gallon highway, both in two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive form, whereas the Ford F-150 diesel hits 30 miles per gallon with certain two-wheel drive configurations, but with four-wheel drive it's only 25. So it's the Ram is still among the most efficient trucks out there. Of course, Ford's going to have a full hybrid version of the next F-150 coming in 2020, and we would expect to see something from GM as well. Some sort of electrified powertrain in their new trucks in the not too distant future.
Well, and all that really means, though, to FCA is like how efficiently, in terms of cost, they can put a hybrid on their truck and sell it. Because, Ford's system may cost Ford more. And, so it sounds like what they've done is they've made an incremental step, and it's actually pretty affordable to put this hardware on the truck. It sounds simple enough. It's not a huge change. So, trucks are going to be...
Yeah, the 48-volt mild hybrid system is about $1,400 cost.
Cost to the manufacturer?
About what it costs. Yeah, that's what it's costing, or that's the incremental cost that you pay for it if you order the option over the regular Hemi. So the V6 mild hybrid is going to be standard, and then you have the standard Hemi in the middle, and then the mild hybrid Hemi on the top. And so to go from the standard Hemi to the mild hybrid Hemi is a $1,400 upcharge, and I can tell you right now, the F-150 hybrid is going to be a lot more expensive than that.
Right, and so $1,400 too. Like you start to get into that sort of ridiculous math that people do about how long it takes the hybrid to pay back, the extra cost. And $1,400 on a 12% fuel economy improvement, like it's going to take a while, but given that people keep the trucks for a while,
I took a look at the calculator on fueleconomy.gov, and it's about just shy of 5 years.
So people keep their cars for 12 years, right? So you'll
and in fact, truck buyers tend to keep their trucks even longer than that. So you will probably and that's at current fuel prices. If fuel prices go up, that payback time drops pretty dramatically on a truck like this.
Oh, numbers are fun. All right. So like overall, it sounds like they've hit another sort of home run or a solid triple with the.
No, absolutely.
All right. What topics are we going to cover?
Let's see. So we have the electric E-Type, We have the Audi PB18 e-tron concept that just debuted in Monterey this week. And has Elon outlived his usefulness? What would you like to hit first?
I didn't pay any attention to the Audi, but the other two I can definitely talk about. The E-Type is cool.
Let's get the Jag out of the way first.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds... it sounds to me way more palatable than the stupid Aston Martin DB5 continuation with all the James Bond crap on it. They're taking E-Types, converting them to electric propulsion, which I'm assuming is the same kind of system that they're using on the normal production Jaguar, electric Jaguars that you can buy now, or it's sort of some of that.
Yeah, I believe they're using the motor from the rear axle of the I-Pace. And putting that in there. So the I-Pace has a dual motor setup like most of the Teslas now for all-wheel drive. The E-Type stays rear drive. They actually showed this as a concept last fall. And this week, in Monterey, they announced that, yes, they will, in fact, build these Jaguar Classics, which is the division of the company that does restoration on old Jags and Land Rovers. We'll be building these for customers to order. And basically, you bring them an E-Type, and they will do the conversion and whatever other restoration work you want to have done on the car as well. And what's interesting is they're doing it in such a way that it's a fully reversible process. So if at some point in the future you decide you want to go back to the old gasoline engine, they will preserve all the parts and they'll be able to take the electric stuff out and put the traditional propulsion system back in there. But yeah, they've designed this thing using some parts from the I-Pace, and presumably things like the power electronics in addition to the motor, a repackaged version of the battery. So the battery pack goes in the front under the hood, and they've actually shaped it, roughly the same size and shape as the classic inline six, so it fits under the hood. I did a little searching around, on Haggerty's valuation site earlier today, and you can get a nice E-Type for about $70,000. If you pick up an E-Type, and they haven't said what the cost of the conversion will be. It will probably not be inexpensive, but you can get a completely silent E-Type if you are so inclined. From Jaguar, and I think it was a foregone conclusion once they showed the concept and saw the reaction that they would ultimately end up building some of these for customers.
Well, it's a great idea, and there's other companies that are doing. There's like I think it's Z Electric Bug out in California, where they one of their big business lines is they take vintage Volkswagens and convert them over to electric. It's not a bad way to go. When you consider the performance characteristics, it's still going to be really fun to drive that E-Type.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's
maybe even more fun than the original, aside from the noise.
It becomes, an interesting, neat thing. And there's plenty of old guys or not old guys, but there's plenty of people with money that want an E-Type, a classic E-Type anyway,
Well, let's face it, most of them are going to be older.
Most of the people who are into the E-Types tend to be on the older side because they remember them. I get it. I appreciate a good E-Type, but
I mean, the E-Type Roadster is still probably one of the most beautiful production cars ever built.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
especially the Series 1, Series 2 cars before they got the big black rubber bumpers on them.
I did. So the one thing that I think is hilarious is, Jaguars from this vintage, British cars from this vintage, and we're saying, oh, they're going to be great. They're going to be all electric. Like, these are the negative Earth Lucas Electric years, Prince of Darkness stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. But I think they've figured it out by now.
Yeah, no, I think they got it nailed down, so I'm sure it'll be just fine. But yeah, you were right though about doing EV conversions on other classic cars. There's a company called Genovation that does that's doing EV conversions on Corvettes. I'm sure, there's a lot of, I don't know if there's any companies that are doing 911s, but there's certainly a lot of people that have done one-off EV conversions on older first generation 911s. Take out the flat six and pack in some batteries and an electric motor. And there will no doubt be plenty of others as well. And so I think that there's probably an interesting business here, for anybody that wants to get into this, for doing these types of conversions on certain classic cars. Some people will consider it heresy to meddle with something like the E-Type in such a way, but
it's a car.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. Like it's another form of enthusiasm when you get down to it, right? Like they're being a car.
And the thing about the E-Type, is it was probably always a better car to look at than to drive.
Oh, really? I see. I haven't driven an E-Type, so I don't know.
If you think about any, 60s era, or earlier car, compared to what we have today in terms of driving dynamics, they were perhaps exciting in ways that might not be ideal. They certainly didn't have the kind of performance that cars today are capable of, especially cars that are a lot cheaper than this. But they're gorgeous to look at, and this is a way to potentially keep these classic cars usable. Especially as we get into an era where, people are starting to think of internal combustion engines as something evil. If you can keep the look alive, and have the potential to restore it back to its original condition, at some point if things turn around, I don't see anything wrong with that.
No, I think it's a great idea, and the secret sauce to all of it is going to be the thing that an automaker can do very well, and that's all of the development of how everything works. So you can get the parts to roll your own pretty easy. You can get the power controller, you can get the batteries and the motor, and you can bolt it all together. But the way the controls respond and the way everything functions is something that automakers have the resources and the talent to really do well, And so that home-built electric car is not going to be as pleasing or rewarding to drive or just as pleasant as something that has had a bunch of hours and millions of dollars worth of actual, engineering expended on it. So I think it bodes well. Whatever, it's
I've never been fundamentally opposed to the idea of restomods, which is what this is. It's a restomod, just like Singer, restoring old 911s are restomods. They're taking classic 911s and putting modern engines in them. And any restomod, where you're taking a classic car and updating it with modern mechanical systems or electrical systems in this case, that makes it something better and, as you say, more rewarding to drive while still preserving that classic look. I don't think we need to be purists about all this stuff. Let's keep what's good and improve the rest.
I do hope that future generations still have the opportunity to hear one of those Jaguar inline sixes just wide open though, because that's a thing. That's
yeah, that is. Or many great internal combustion engines. That one of the great things about them is that visceral feel from the sound of some of these great engines, and that's something that will unfortunately be lost in the era of EVs.
That's true. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've been around steam locomotives, for example. So I guess that's sort of the same kind of idea. Eventually, they'll be very rare.
Yep.
Oh well.
Speaking of EVs, we've also at the out in Monterey this week, Monterey, California, where Pebble Beach Concours is going on this weekend, and it's now known as Monterey Car Week because of all the various events that happen in that area at Laguna Seca and Pebble Beach and elsewhere. There's been a few concepts shown off. One of the more interesting ones is the Audi PB18 e-tron, with the name taking inspiration from the Le Mans winning R18. And as you might guess, it too is all electric. And that's fine. It's borrowing parts from some of the other upcoming Audi and VW Group EVs. But it's also, I think it's like 650 some odd horsepower in base form, and can do short bursts of over 700 horsepower. But what's really kind of interesting about this thing is the design. in particular the cabin. Did you have a chance to take a look at this thing, Dan?
I just briefly glanced at it, and to me, it didn't scream like Audi concept. It's different.
Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't look much like most Audis, most contemporary Audis anyway. It's designed at their new studio in California. And it's got some aspects of the Audi hexagonal grille, in the fascia, but it's designed to look like a mid-engine sort of shooting brake type of thing. But the passenger compartment is where things get really interesting. Because what they did, the driver's seat and the controls, well, first of all, the whole thing, in conceptualizing this car, they, while Audi is kind of taking the lead on the development of a lot of the autonomous driving technology for Volkswagen Group and deployment of that, this car was designed around what they call level 0, which basically means no assists. And this car literally has no driving assist systems in it.
Good.
There's no adaptive cruise or anything else. It's all completely up to the driver to do.
Good.
And to that end, what they've done, because it's electric, it's of course drive-by-wire systems. So you've got drive-by-wire steering and braking and acceleration. But what that enabled them to do is the driver's pod, the driver's seat is in kind of a pod, where you've got the seat with a 5-point harness and the controls right in front of the driver. And when the driver doesn't have a passenger to take along, and what they don't show is where the passenger seat actually would be. It describes in the release, having a passenger seat integrated in there with a 3-point harness, but it doesn't actually show it in the car. So I'm not sure about that. But what it's designed to do is that whole pod with the seat, the driver's seat, and the controls and everything is designed to slide over from the left-hand side into the middle of the car, like a race car. And they have a video with Alan McNish, who won many races at Le Mans with Audi. Pulling the car into a garage, putting on his driver's suit, shifting that whole pod over from the left to the center, and then getting back in and taking it out on the track. And so that's kind of the ideal position when you're driving on the track. More like a Formula One car. And so it's kind of an interesting idea. I mean, it's not something you're ever likely to see in a production model, but it's kind of cool for a concept, and it's nice to see somebody doing an interesting concept like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that was one of the things about the McLaren F1, right? Was the way the seats were arranged. Right? It's kind of that sort of much more racing-inspired sort of seating arrangement. So.
Right, they were all fixed in place though. So you had the center driver's seat and 2 passenger seats on either side and behind. Right.
So I like this idea where I think it plays very well to the idea of multi-purpose from a single car, because and it may be just a gimmick, but again, maybe they're testing the waters with a very high-end car. I don't know of too many people who would buy like a super high-end electric exotic and necessarily want to race it, but I mean, maybe that's a thing that people want to do. Maybe they didn't know they wanted to do it until they can.
Yeah, my guess is we'll never actually see this thing, built in production.
I'm trying to be really hopeful here.
But I wouldn't be surprised to see, the next generation, or maybe the one after that, replacement for the R8 that is all electric. Audi has dabbled with doing electric R8s, a couple times now over the past 10 years. With the first generation one, they showed a concept in 2008, I think. The original e-tron. And they promised to build some production cars, but after they built 10 prototypes and spent a bunch of time testing them, they never went forward with production. And then the second generation R8, they said that again. Apparently, they have built some of those for customers, although I don't think I've ever actually seen one anywhere. It's not clear, how many or where they are. They've never really been spotted on the roads. But now that, Audi's really going all in on electrification, I wouldn't be surprised to see, sometime in the early 20s, to see something at least inspired by this car as a next generation supercar from Audi.
That's the best you can hope for, right? With any concept car, is that you get some of that cachet in the showroom. So.
Yep.
We'll see.
All right. One last topic for this week. Elon. We've tried to avoid talking about Elon too much over the last few weeks.
Well, I mean, so first of all, a lot of the talk has been like financial stuff that I personally, I'm not as well versed in that stuff as I think you need to be to talk about where they are with in terms of like stock price and investors and all that stuff. So, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah. So, Ed Niedermeyer called me yesterday. For those that don't know, Ed been a writer for the Daily Kanban for quite a while, and one of the co-hosts of the Autonocast. And I talked to him from time to time. And he now, a couple weeks ago, he went to work for Automotive News as their new Silicon Valley reporter. And so he called me yesterday to talk about Elon for a story he's working on. And the premise of the story is, can Tesla survive without Elon? And, I kind of turned that on its head a little bit and said, it's more like, can Tesla survive with Elon? My premise, my take on this, is that I think that Elon Musk really may have outlived his usefulness for Tesla in many ways. I think, starting a car company like Tesla, you needed somebody with a vision, for what the company should be, what kind of products it should be making, what it should be doing. But ultimately, once you grow a company beyond a certain size, you can't rely on just a single visionary leader, to run the company.
Yeah.
It's not humanly possible for one individual to manage a company with, 35,000 employees.
Well, and the best visionary leaders understand that. And at a certain point, they learn how to delegate.
Exactly. And, that's, I've said that, many times in the past. There's often the comparisons of Musk to Steve Jobs, and Musk, in some respects is similar to Steve Jobs.
Oh, he's an asshole?
And having that, well, there's that too. I wasn't going to really go there quite that way, but yes, he let's put it this way. He is not, he's often a very unpleasant person to be around. And, he's got, this grand vision for what his companies should be and what they should be doing. But, the difference is, especially in the second generation of Jobs at Apple after he came back in 1997, because he was fired in 85. And when he came back in 97, by that time he had learned, he was self-aware enough to recognize what his limitations were and the things he was good at and the things he was not interested in, which was a lot of the detail, day-to-day management stuff. He wanted to focus on, the vision part of it, focus on what kinds of products the company should be producing. And, things like, managing supply chains and manufacturing and everything else, he was not interested in that. He knew he wasn't good at it and wasn't interested in it. And that's why he brought in people like Tim Cook, and many other staff, and, delegated that responsibility to those people that had expertise in that area. And he set up the company, for success, with, having this kind of focus on, what they should be doing, from a large, from a big picture perspective.
Right.
So, even now, nearly 7 years after he died, the company is more successful than ever, even without him. And I think, with Tesla, I think it's very similar. The problem is, Elon doesn't recognize those limitations in himself. He thinks he can do it all, and worse, he believes he's the only one who can do it. He won't delegate that responsibility to people. And I think that's a problem for Tesla. I've said this for a long time. I admire what he has achieved and what the company has achieved. And, I mean, we wouldn't have cars like the Audi PB18 or an electric E-Type today if it weren't for the success that Elon has had with Tesla. But, I think it's really time for him to move on, and I think he has defined what Tesla should be, and I think it's time to get management in place that knows how to execute on that and give them the authority and the responsibility to do that. And I really think that that Tesla would be better off without Elon now.
Well, I think, and we had a little Twitter thread going with Ed about this a couple days ago too.
Dan, you still there?
My take is that Tesla flourishes without Elon. If they make the right moves, I don't understand why we've got this this consistent idea of like visionary as like almost like a messiah, right? Like a Jesus type guy where he's the one with the answers, he's the one with the vision. Like there's some of that, you get a visionary personality, they will inspire other people on the team to actually achieve, but it's not just one guy. There's no point in him sitting, sleeping in the factory. Like, what are you going to do? You're CEO. Get out of here. Go do something else and make sure that your people are empowered to do what they need. So it's.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And, I think it's high time for him to move on and focus on other stuff. I think that, he has set up the mission for Tesla, and there's plenty of people that know what that mission should be. And I think that there are lots of people who could execute on that mission without his interference, and without fundamentally changing that.
I completely agree. I think that's our new vision for Tesla. I think that's completely right.
I think the one question, the other question though, is a big part of why a lot of investors have put so much money into Tesla and have been willing to bid up the valuation of Tesla is because of their belief in Elon. And I think those people need to reconsider now and think, do they believe in this one guy or do they believe in what the company is trying to do? And, if they believe in, and if it's the latter, if they believe in what the company is trying to do and actually achieving that, then, I think that, Tesla can retain a high value, even without his active involvement. And if all they believe in is Elon, well, then that's a pretty foolish bet to make because, Elon is just one guy and, anything can happen. An accident could happen, his Gulfstream could crash, and he could be dead tomorrow. And to make such a big bet on that one person rather than on what the company is and what it's trying to be, I think is foolish.
All right. Well, with that and a dropped call in the middle of it all that we're going to fix with the magic of editing, I think we're good with this week.
Yeah, I think so too. And we're also going to have a special episode that should be coming out a couple days after this one, which is an interview that I recorded yesterday or a couple days ago with Larry Burns about his new book called Autonomy: The Quest for the Driverless Car. Larry and I had a great conversation about that. So make sure you take a little time to listen to that. And that's it for this week for me.
All right. Thanks for listening. I should do these all on my commute because it makes it go so much faster. All right. We'll catch everyone next week.
All right. Bye.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.